Bright QT. Every student matters.
Hello, dear students. Welcome to another lecture. In this class, we are going to begin with Chapter 5 of Class 11th Alternative English Nagaland Board, which is The Fly, written by Catherine Mansfield. Now, Catherine Mansfield had only 3 of her works published till the time she died. She died at a very young age, that is 34, and till then she got only 3 of her works published. Much of it was published after her death. She was considered as one of those authors who influenced the short story writing. So till date, she is very popularly known for her short story writing. Now, she is very famous for building a story through very intricate, minute details of the characters and of the things around them. The same could be seen in this story where she used the symbol of a fly to talk about the lives of her characters. Woody Field, who worked with his boss. Now, we don't know the name of the boss. He's been addressed as the boss throughout the story. So, Woody Field would get the permission to go out of his house only to meet his boss every Tuesday. And whenever he would visit his boss would always show off about the expensive things around him in his office, the things that belonged to him. Now, that particular day when this story was narrated, Woody Field mentioned about the boss's dead son. Now, both Woody Field and the boss had lost their sons to war. Both their sons were soldiers and they had lost their sons to war. So Woody Field mentioned about his son, and the boss suddenly was overwhelmed by all the wonderful memories he had of his son. Now, what were those memories that he came across, and why was this story titled The Fly by Catherine Mansfield? We are going to read and find that out. So, without much ado, let us begin with the reading now. So, why are very snug in here, piped old Mr. Woody Field, and he peered out of the great green leather armchair by his friend, the boss's desk, as a baby peers out of its pram. His talk was over, it was time for him to be off, but he did not want to go. Since he had retired, since his stroke, the wife and the girls kept him boxed up in the house every day of the week except Tuesday. On Tuesday, he was dressed and brushed and allowed to cut back to the city for the day. Though what he did there, the wife and girls could not imagine. He made a nuisance of himself to his friends, they supposed. Well, perhaps also. All the same, we cling to our last pleasures as the trees cling to its last leaves. So there sat old Woody Field smoking a cigar and staring almost greedily at the boss, who rolled in his office chair, stout, rosy, 5 years older than he, and still going strong, still at the helm. It did one good to see him. So the story opened with the dialogue of Woody Field. He was smoking a cigar. So he piped. We all have seen the cigar pipe, right? So old Woody Field had a cigar pipe in his mouth. And while he was smoking, he said that it is very snug. Snug means it is very comfortable here. So Woody Field said so, and he peered out. He looked out of that big green leather armchair where he was sitting next to his boss, and there close to him was a pram. Pram is where a small baby is put. So inside the pram was a baby who was looking out of the pram. Now, Woody Field's conversation with his boss was over, and it was time for him to be off. That means it was time for him to return back home. But he did not want to leave. He was retired now, and he has also had a stroke. He had a heart attack, after which his wife and his daughters did not allow him to go out of the house. They kept him boxed up. Boxed up means he was always caught inside the four walls of his house, except for Tuesday. On Tuesday, he would dress himself, comb his hair, and would go to the city to spend the day off. What he did there was something that his wife and his daughters did not expect. He would go and would have a conversation, a nice conversation with his boss. On the other hand, his wife and his daughters, imagined him to go to some club where the other people made fun of him. But he says that people like to cling on to some things for their pleasure. There are a lot of things that people hold on to just because they like to think about that. Just the way a tree holds on tight to its last leaves, similarly, people also keep a lot of things onto themselves, irrespective of the fact whether they are true or not. They just like to think about them because it gives them happiness. So if his family thought that ways, he never thought of, making them believe that it was not so. He continued with the same. So there Woody Field was sitting, he was smoking a cigar, and he was looking at his boss. His boss, who was in his office, he was stout, he was a little heavier. He was 5 years older than him, he was pink, and he was very strong and still at the helm. Still at the helm means he was still very much capable of working and taking care of the entire office. And Woody Field felt very good when he would meet his boss. Wistfully, admiringly, the old voice added, it's snug in here, upon my word. So once again, this man, that is Woody Field, wistfully means he was longing. He missed to work in this office again. Now that he was no more an employee, he missed working here. So once again, remembering about how much he wanted to work here, how much he admired this place, he loved this place, he once again said that, mark my word, whatever I'm saying is true. This place is very comfortable. Yes, it's comfortable enough, the boss agreed. And he flipped the Financial Times with a paper knife. As a matter of fact, he was proud of his room. He liked to have it admired, especially by old Woody Field. It gave him a feeling of deep, solid satisfaction to be planted there in the midst of it, in full view of that frail old figure in the muffler. So the boss, who was sitting on his chair and was reading a newspaper, the Financial Times, he was sitting, he turned the page of the newspaper and he said, yes, it's very comfortable. Now we have been told about this boss that he was very proud of his room. He wanted people to praise, to admire his room, especially Woody Field, because whenever Woody Field would come there and talk good about him and the room, he got a lot of satisfaction because he would compare himself with that man who was just 5 years younger to him, but despite that, he was weak. Frail is weak, so he was now weak, he looked old and was wearing a muffler around her neck. So that gave him a lot of satisfaction about himself. I've had it done up lately, he explained, as he had explained for the past how many weeks. So the boss added that I've had it done up lately. I've had it done up lately means there is some renovation, some changes that I have made to this room. And this he explained for the past how many weeks. Now this means that even Woody Field did not remember for how many times, for how many visits he had been listening to the same thing. So his boss had certainly got his place renovated, but every Tuesday when Woody Field would turn up, he would repeat it again and again because he liked to show off, he liked to boast about it. New carpet, and he pointed to the bright red carpet with a pattern of large white rings. New furniture, and he nodded towards the massive bookcase and the table with legs like twisted treacle. Electric heating. He waved almost exultantly towards the 5 transparent pearly sausages glowing so softly in the tilted copper pan. So he continued to talk about the furniture and boast about it. He first talked about the new carpet, and then he pointed towards the carpet which was bright red in color and had a pattern of white rings on it. Then he pointed towards the new furniture and he showed the bookcase which was huge. Massive means the bookcase which was huge, and the legs of that bookcase were very twisted, like a twisted treacle. Treacle is something which is very sticky. So the design of the leg of that bookcase was such that the table was such that it looked something very sticky was hanging onto it. And then he showed the electric heating. And when he showed the electric heating, he got very exultant. He got very happy. And he pointed towards the 5 transparent sausages. So there was basically electric heating, on the top of which was a copper pan, and in that copper pan there were 5 sausages which were getting heated. So he displayed that, he showed off the changes that he had done in his room. But he did not draw Oldfield's attention to the photograph on the table of a grave-looking boy in uniform standing in one of those spectral photographers' parks with photographer's storm clouds behind him. It was not new. It had been there for 6 years. So, he showed everything. He pointed out towards all the things that were there in the room except for a photograph which was there on the table. That photograph was of a grave, a very serious looking boy. Just a second. So that photograph was of a very serious looking boy who was standing in a park with spectral photographers. Spectral means ghost-like. So basically, that was a picture in which it seemed that there were a lot of photographers around him, ghost-like photographers around him, because they could be seen everywhere. Now, this picture, Mr. Woody Field tells us, was not new. The picture had been there in the room for the past 6 years. There was something I wanted to tell you, said old Woody Field, and his eyes grew dim, remembering. Now, what was it? I had it in my mind and I started out this morning. His hands began to tremble and patches of red showed over above his beard. So old Woody Field suddenly remembered something. He said that I wanted to tell you something, but he forgot. And since he was not able to remember what he wanted to say, his eyes became dim. They lost the brightness that they had. So his eyes became dim and his hands began to tremble. And because he was making a lot of efforts to remember that, on his beard one could see red patches. So he remarked that he remembered what he had to say in the morning when he left for the boss's house, but he had forgotten about it now. Poor old chap, he's on his last pins, thought the boss. And feeling kindly, he winked at the old man and said jokingly, I tell you what, I've got a little drop of something here that will do you good before you go out into the cold again. It is beautiful stuff. It would not hurt a child. He took a key off his watch chain, unlocked a cupboard below his desk, and drew forth a dark squat bottle. That is the medicine, said he, and the man from whom I got it told me on the strict duty it came from the cellars at Windsor Castle. So the boss thought that this poor little chap, that is old Woody Field, was on his last pins. He thought that his condition was very bad and that he was struggling to survive. He was in a very critical stage of his life. Now, the boss wanted to be kind to his employee, so he winked at him. Winked means blinked. When you close one eye to somebody, so that is winking. So he blinked at the old man and jokingly said that I tell you what, I've got something with me which you will drink, and just a single drop of it is going to give you energy before you go out into the cold. He said that it is a beautiful thing that I am going to give you and it will not hurt. It is so nice, it is so smooth that it will not hurt anybody, not even a child. Then there was a key that was attached to his watch chain. He took out that key, he unlocked a cupboard which was below his desk, and he brought out a shot bottle from there. He said, now that is the medicine I was talking about, and the man who got it from me told me on the strict QT. QT is the abbreviation for quiet. So he said that the man who got this bottle for me told me to be quiet because he got this bottle from the cellars. You know, cellars are those people who store things. So the sellers who were there at the Windsor Castle, so he brought this bottle from there. Now Windsor Castle is the oldest and the largest occupied castle in the world, and it is the official home of the British monarch. So this bottle of alcohol that he took out from his desk was old and was so special because it was brought from the Windsor Castle. Old Woody Field's mouth fell open at sight. He could not have looked more surprised if the boss had produced a rabbit. So the moment Woody Field saw that bottle, he got so surprised that his mouth fell open. And the narrator said that even if he would have seen a rabbit emerge out of that cupboard, he would not have seemed so shocked. It is whiskey, ain't it? He piped feebly. The boss turned the bottle and lovingly showed him the label. Whiskey it was. Do you know, said he, peering up at the boss wonderingly, they won't let me touch it at home. And he looked as though he was going to cry. So Woody Field, when he saw that, he asked very feebly. Now feeble again is weak. So very weakly he asked that this is whiskey that you're showing me, right? Now the boss turned the bottle around so that he could show the label of the whiskey bottle to Woodyfield, and it was a whiskey. Now, when he saw that, Woodyfield got so emotional that he was almost on the verge of crying, and he said that at home, my family, my wife, and daughters do not even let me touch it. Ah, that's where we know a bit more than the ladies, cried the boss, swooping across for two tumblers that stood on the table with the water bottle and pouring a generous finger into each. Drink it down, it will do you good. And don't put any water with it. It is sacrilege to tamper with stuff like this. Ah, he tossed off pulled out his handkerchief, hastily wiped his moustache, and cocked an eye at old Woodyfield, who was rolling in his chaps. So, the boss made fun of it by saying that, this is what we know of ladies. This is how the ladies are. So we cannot complain about that. Then he took out two tumblers, two glasses, and there was a water bottle which was next to it. He poured some amount of whiskey in both the glasses, and he told Woodyfield to drink it without water, because he said that this is such a pure stuff that if you're going to tamper it, if you are going to put water into it, it is going to get spoiled. And this thing is very sacred. This is holy. This is pure. So you cannot spoil this thing by putting water in this whiskey. He drank whatever amount was there in his glass. He wiped off his mustache, and then he looked at Mr. Woodyfield, who was still rolling that glass in his hands. The old man swallowed, was silent a moment, and then said faintly, "It's nutty." But it warmed him. It crept into his chill old brain. He remembered. "That was it," he said, heaving himself out of his chair. "I thought you'd like to know. The girls were in Belgium last week having a look at poor Reggie's grave, and they happened to come across your boys. They're quite near each other, it seems." So the old man finally swallowed, he finally drank the content of that glass and was silent for a moment. And then he said that the flavor was a little nutty, but that warmed him, that made him feel warm, and that gave a chill to his old brain, and he remembered what he had to say. He got off his chair and he said that, "I thought you would like to know that my girls, my daughters, went to Belgium last week to look at poor Reggie's grave." Now, Reggie was the son of Woodyfield. So he was Woodyfield's son. He also was a part of the army. He also was a soldier, and he lost his life at war. So he told his boss that the daughters went to Belgium to have a look at their brother's grave, and they went to his brother, that is the boss's son's grave as well. And he told the boss that my son and your son's graves are quite near to each other. Old Woodyfield paused, but the boss made no reply. Only a quiver in his eyelids showed that he heard. "The girls were delighted with the way the place is kept," piped the old voice. "Beautifully looked after. Could not be better if they were at home. You've not been across, have you?" No, no. For various reasons, the boss had not been across. "There's miles of it," quavered old Woodyfield, "and it's all as neat as a garden. flowers growing on all the graves, nice broad paths. It was plain from his voice how much he liked a nice broad path. So old Woody Field, after he had spoken what he wanted to, he paused, but the boss did not say anything. His eyelids, they quivered, they moved, and the quivering of his eyelids showed that he heard what old Woody Field had said. Woody Field continued again that the girls were very delighted. They were happy with the way that place was kept. It is a beautiful place, and the people who look after those graves to take very good care of it. And he said that even if we would have buried them at home, we would not have been able to look after their graves so well the way they are being at Belgium. Then he asked the boss that you've not been there for a very long time, have you? And the boss said that no. And there were a lot of reasons why the boss did not visit his son's grave. Then the old Woody Field quavered. Now, quavered is that his voice started to tremble because the effect of the whiskey had started to take place. So, old Woody Field said that there is miles of it. There is a huge place where these graves are set. The place is huge and it is as neat as a garden. Flowers are growing on each grave. The paths are very broad, and from his voice, from Woody Field's voice, it was quite evident that he liked paths which were broad. The pause came again, then the old man brightened wonderfully. So there was again a pause, and the old man, that is, old Woody Field, there was suddenly a cheerfulness that could be seen on his face and in his personality. Do you know what the hotel made the girls pay for a pot of jam? He piped 10 francs. Robbery, I call it. It was a little pot, so Gertrude says, no bigger than a half-crown. And she had not taken more than a spoonful when they charged her 10 francs. Gertrude brought the pot away with her to teach him a lesson. Quite right, too. It's trading on our feelings. They think because we are over there having a look round, we are ready to pay anything. That's what it is. And he turned towards the door. So old Woody Field continued telling him that when his girl stayed at a hotel, the people at the hotel, asked his daughters to pay 10 francs for a pot of jam. One of the daughters' name was Gertrude, and old Woody Field said that that my daughter Gertrude had taken only a spoon of jam from the bottle and she was told to pay 10 francs for that. He said that it was robbery, and just because we go to a place and we look around the things, the hotel people feel that we can pay for anything. And then he said that my daughter brought back home the entire bottle of jam to teach them a lesson. So paying for one spoon, 10 francs for one spoon was a very huge amount. So the girl brought back home the entire bottle of jam. He said so, and he turned towards the door, preparing to leave. Quite right, cried the boss, though what was quite right he had not the least idea. He came round by his desk, followed the shuffling footsteps to the door and saw the old fellow out. Woody Field was gone. So the boss simply said that yes, you are right. But what was he saying was right, he had no idea. He was totally blank. He came around his desk, he helped, he bade Woody Field goodbye, and now Woody Field was gone. For a long moment, the boss stayed staring at nothing, while the grey-haired office messenger, watching him, dodged in and out of his cubby hole like a dog that expects to be taken for a run. Then, I'll see nobody for half an hour, Macy, said the boss. Understand? Nobody at all. Very good, sir. The door shut, the firm, heavy steps recrossed the bright carpet, the fat body plumped down in the spring chair, and leaning forward, the boss covered his face with his hands. He wanted, he intended, he had arranged to weep. So after Woodyfield was gone, for a long moment, the boss just kept on sitting, He was staring at something, but he did not know what he was looking at. So staring means when you are looking at something continuously. So he kept on looking at something, he didn't know what. And then he had a messenger, an office messenger who was grey haired. So he was old enough. And that grey messenger was again and again coming out of his cubicle. Here, cubby hole refers to his cubicle where that messenger would sit. So he was coming out of his cubicle again and again looking at the boss, and he has been compared to a dog who liked to do this to, his or her master so that they would take him out for a walk. So the boss finally said to the messenger that for the next half an hour, I don't want to see anybody, Macy. Now, Macy was the name of that man. He said, I don't want to meet anyone. Macy also said, very good, sir. After that, the door was shut. The firm, heavy steps recrossed. So the boss moved, he crossed the bright carpet. His fat body sat on the spring chair. He leaned forward, he bent forward, he covered his face with his hands. He wanted, he intended, he desired, he prepared to weep. Why did he want to weep? Because he was reminded of his dead son. It had been a terrible shock to him when old Woodyfield sprang that remark upon him about the boy's grave. It was exactly as though the earth had opened and he had seen the boy lying there with Woodyfield's girl staring down at him. For it was strange. Although over 6 years had passed away, the boss never thought of the boy except as lying unchanged and unblemished in his uniform, asleep forever. My son, groaned the boss. But no tears came yet. In the past, in the first few months and even years after the boy's death, he had only to say those words to be overcome by such grief that nothing short of a violent fit of weeping could relieve him. Time, he had declared then, he had told everybody could make no difference. Other men perhaps might recover, might live their lost town, but not he. How was it possible? His boy was an only son. Ever since his birth, the boy had worked at building up this office for him. He had no other meaning, for it was not for the boy. Life itself had come to have no other meaning. How on earth could he have slaved, denied himself, kept going all those years without the promise forever before him of the boy stepping into his shoes and carrying on where he left off? So he remembered about his son. He says that at first when Woodyfield spoke about his boy's grave, that remark came to him as such a shock. He felt as if the earth had opened and his son was lying inside it and Woodyfield's girls were looking at him. It was strange somehow. 6 years had passed away, and for the boss, the only image that he remembered of his son was the same. He always imagined his son lying in that grave, unaffected, not even a mark in his uniform, very clean, very immaculate uniform, and asleep forever. My son, the boss groaned, so he cried out, he spoke that he was my son. But still no tears came. In the past, in the first few months after his son died, and even in the years later on, even if he would say my son, he says that he would be overcome by such grief, by such sorrow, that he would start crying violently, and unless and until he would cry, he did not feel okay. Then he would say to all the people that for him, time would not heal anything. You know, it is said that time is the best healer, and with the passage of time, people get over their loss. But he declared that for him, time also would not be able to heal anything. He said that the other people might be able to recover. Other men refers here to the other people who had lost their sons to war. So he said that the other people might recover from the loss, but for him it is going to be impossible because he was his only son. And ever since his son was born, the boss had worked very hard to set up the business for him. The business did not have any other meaning for the boss other than the fact that he wanted his son to step into his shoes, to take charge of his business and proceed ahead with that. So he always dreamt of it. He imagined his son to take a charge of the same. And that promise had been so near being fulfilled. The boy had been in the office learning the ropes for a year before the war. Every morning they had started off together, they had come back by the same train. And what congratulations he had received as the boy's father. No wonder he had taken to it marvelously. As to his popularity with the staff, every man, jack of them, down to old Macy, could not make enough of the boy. And he was not the least spoiled. No, he was just his bright, natural self, with the right word for everybody, with the boyish look and his habit of saying simply splendid. So he described his son by saying that the promise that he had made to himself, that he wanted his son to move ahead, to proceed towards the fulfillment of his dream and to accomplish his business, that was almost about to be fulfilled. The boy was coming to the office and had started learning ropes for a year. Learning ropes for a year means he started understanding the entire business mechanism, how things work before the war. Every morning, the son and the father would come to the office together and would go back by the same train. And he remarked, he remembered the compliments, the appreciation that he received on being the father of such a wonderful boy. His son was so popular that every man he came across, be it somebody who did a small task for him or Macy, everybody spoke well of the child, and he was proud of the fact that his son was not spoiled. He was a bright child, he was very natural, and he always knew what to say to somebody. He always knew the right things to talk to the people. And he had a habit of always saying simply splendid. So this is what the boy would always say, simply splendid. But all that was over and done with as though it had never happened. The day had come when Macy had handed him the telegram that brought the whole place crashing about his head. Deeply regret to inform you. And he had left the office a broken man with his life in ruins. But he remembers that everything came to an end just the way it had started. He felt as if his boy had never been coming to the office because it stopped suddenly. The day came, that unfortunate day, when Macy came with a telegram in his hand in which it was written, "Deeply regret to inform you," and we all can assume what was written there on. The entire place came to a crash. He left the office. He was a man who was broken, whose soul was broken, and his life was totally ruined. It was spoiled, it was over. 6 years ago, 6 years. How quickly time passed. It might have happened yesterday. The boss took his hands from his face. He was puzzled. Something seemed to be wrong with him. He was not feeling as he wanted to feel. He decided to get up and have a look at the boy's photograph, but it was not a favorite photograph of his. The expression was unnatural. It was cold, even stern looking. The boy had never looked like that. So he again remembered that it had been 6 years. The time was a very long time, and the time had passed so quickly. The boss took off his hands from his face, but he was confused because he could not cry. He felt that there was something wrong with him. He did not feel what he usually felt when he thought about his boy. He took the photograph of his son in his hands, believing that that might help him cry, but he just could not. He saw the photograph and he did not like the photograph. The reason being, he felt that his son was very unnatural in that photograph. He looked very cold, very strict. He was not the way he usually was. So the father did not like that photograph of his son. At that moment, the boss noticed that a fly had fallen into his broad ink pot and was trying feebly but desperately to clamber out. "Help, help," said those struggling legs, but the sides of the ink pot were wet and slippery. It fell back again and began to swim. The boss took up a pen, picked the fly out of the ink, and shook it onto a piece of blotting paper. For a fraction of a second, it lay still on the dark patch that oozed round it. Then the front legs waved, took hold, and pulling its small, sodden body up, it began the immense task of cleaning the ink from its wings. So, what happened at that moment? The boss noticed that a fly fell into the broad ink pot. So, finally, we have a fly because the title is The Fly. So, the fly fell into an ink pot that was on his table, and the fly was trying to clamber out, to come out of that ink pot. The boss has described the desperate efforts of the fly to come out. The fly was weak but continued to do that. He felt that the fly was crying, "Help, help." But the sides of the ink pot were very wet and slippery, and so the fly fell in again and began to swim. The boss, with the help of a pen, took out the fly and dropped it on a paper in front of him. For a fraction of a second, the fly just lay dead because of the ink, the heaviness of the ink that was around the fly. But then the front legs of the fly waved, they moved. The fly suddenly started taking hold of its entire body. It began to clean its wings by moving. Over and under went a leg along a wing as the stone goes over and under the sky. Then there was a pause while the fly, seeming to stand on the tips of his toes, tried to expand first one wing and then the other. It succeeded at last, and sitting down, it began like a minute, and like a minute cat to clean its face. Now one could imagine that the little front legs rubbed against each other lightly, joyfully. The horrible danger was over. It had escaped. It was ready for life again. So the fly over and under. So the efforts of the fly have been described again. So again and again, the fly continued to move its legs to clean the wing. This movement has been compared to the movement of a scythe. Scythe is a tool which is used to cut the rock. So when you cut the rock, you just continue to move it very, very quickly so that it would make a mark. So the fly continued to do that until and unless, it actually felt that the wings were clean. The fly first stood on the tip of its toes, and then it tried first to expand one wing and then the other wing. Finally, the fly succeeded. It sat down like a small cat who was trying to clean its face. And now the boss could imagine the fly rubbing its front legs together. It was happy, it was joyful that the danger was over and the fly was ready to live again. So the fly survived. But just then the boss had an idea. He plunged his pen back into the ink, leaned his thick wrist on the blotting paper, and as the fly tricked its wing down came a great heavy blot. What would it make of that? What indeed? The little beggar seemed absolutely cold, stunned, and afraid to move because of what would happen next. But then, as if painfully, it dragged itself forward. The front legs waved, caught hold, and more slowly this time the task began from the beginning. So, what happened then? Suddenly, the boss had an idea. What did he do? He dropped his pen inside the bottle of the ink, and just when the fly was moving its wings, the boss dropped a drop of ink on its wing. The moment that happened, the heaviness of that blot made the fly feel cowed. The fly has now been compared to a beggar who was scared, who did not know what to do next. It did not know what was going to happen to it next. It was in pain again, and once again it started dragging itself further. It started moving itself forward. The front legs of the fly, they again moved. He caught hold of its legs, and once again the entire process that the fly had done earlier to clean its wings started from the beginning. He's a plucky little devil, thought the boss, and he felt a real admiration for the fly's courage. That was the way to tackle things. That was the right spirit. Never say die. It was only a question of. But the fly had again finished its laborious task, and the boss had just time to refill his pen to shake fair and square on the new clean body yet another drop. What about it this time? A painful moment of suspense followed. But behold, the front legs were waving again. The boss felt a rush of relief. So, when the fly managed to survive after the first drop rather, the boss started admiring the fly by saying that the fly is very brave. Now he started thinking that that was the way one should tackle the things. That was the spirit with which one has to tackle the things. One should never give up. One should have this never say die attitude in oneself. The fly once again finished the the hard-working task of cleaning itself when the boss refilled its pen and once again dropped a drop of ink on the newly cleaned body of the fly. What will happen this time? There was a painful suspense that followed. The boss did not know what would the fly do now. But behold, just look at the fly. Once again, the front legs of the fly started to move, and the boss was relieved. He was happy that the fly was making efforts to come out clean from this situation as well. He leaned over the fly and said to it tenderly, "You artful little bird." And he actually had the brilliant notion of breathing onto it to help the drying process. All the same, there was something timid and weak about its efforts now. And the boss decided that this time should be the last as he dipped the pen in his bottle of ink. So the boss he leaned over the ink, over the fly, and very tenderly, very kindly, he was talking to the fly. He said that you are a very brave bird. Now, bird over here refers to boy. So he was almost on the verge of saying boy. So the fly was trying, and the boss was leaning over the fly in such a manner that it seemed that he was breathing over the fly so that it would be able to dry its wings easily and sooner. But then the efforts of the fly seemed a little timid. The fly was very afraid now. It felt weak. And the same energy that the fly had shown earlier could not be seen in its efforts now. And the boss decided that now would be the last time when he would do that. So once again, he dropped his ink pen in the ink pot, and it was the last. The last blot fell on the soaked blotting paper, and the dragged fly lay in it and did not stir. The back legs were stuck to the body, the front legs were not to be seen. So the moment the boss dipped and dropped another ink drop on the fly was dead. It could not stir itself. The front legs of the fly were attached to the body. The back legs were attached to the body, and the front legs could not be seen. "Come on," said the boss, "look sharp," and it stirred it with his pen. But in vain. Nothing happened or was likely to happen because the fly was dead. So the boss said to the fly, "Come on, try." But whatever he said was in vain. It was useless now because the fly was dead. So nothing could have happened now. The boss lifted the cords on the end of the paper knife and flung it into the waste basket paper. But such a grinding feeling of wretchedness seized him that he felt positively frightened. He started forward and pressed the bell for Macy. So the boss lifted up the dead body of that animal with the paper knife and threw it into the waste paper basket. But at the same time, there was some wretchedness. There was something that disturbed the boss, and he felt very afraid. He felt frightened of it. He moved forward and he pressed the bell to call Macy. "Bring me some fresh blotting paper," he said sternly, "and look sharp about it." And while the dog padded away, he fell to wondering what it was he had been thinking about before. What was it? It took out his handkerchief and passed it inside his collar. For the life of him, he could not remember. So he pressed the bell and he told Macy to bring him a fresh blotting paper. When he did that, the dog, that means Macy, earlier also Macy had been compared to a dog. So Macy went out, and after he went out, the boss started wondering what he was thinking, what was going on in his mind. What was there that was troubling him, and what was it that he was doing with the fly? He took out his handkerchief and he cleaned the around of his neck because he was sweating. He just could not remember what he just did and what he went through. Now, the summary as well as the relevance of the end and the connection that the story has with the fly, I am going to cover in the next lecture of mine. So, I will see you all soon in my next video.